Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duvel, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who will take his captured armies and build of them a tower to the skies. Perfect.
Yep. June Longo.
Oh, wow. That was amazing timing. Amazing. Thank you, June.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes, he just put her out of the room.
She's out of the room and barks still.
Oh, perfect. Perfect.
Great.
Oh,
Yep.
Very pleased.
Yep. Tim Longo, that's me, and that's one of my dogs, the most irritating one, but the cutest one. Anyway, yes, we're here. Yes.
We're here at the end, at last, of our long series about Final Fantasy VI, originally Final Fantasy III here in the States, and we should remark again that we had that wonderful interview last week, bonus episode with Sebastian Deacon, previously a professional singer for a brief time, now a writer, but also has a lot of musical background. And it was really fun to talk to him about his new book and the sort of things he explores in it with this game. So hopefully that'll satisfy people for 5 years about music, because it'll still probably not be the thing we're best to talk about. But, we gave you that one. So, be happy.
Yeah, it was awesome and also just a very different, something that we don't do normally. So it was kind of fun and different and cool on multiple levels. And Bio was actually on my stream that night after we recorded. So literally we finished recording with Sebastian, and then I went on and was playing Death Stranding, and Bio came on, and I was like, because it was his suggestion, right?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Yeah. And he pointed the book out, and I was like, Bio, we just recorded. Thank you. And thank you again to
Yeah, for
Bio.
sure. Actually, we have an email from him this week as well. So
no, I'm not surprised.
I gave it to you. I gave you most of the long ones, so I hope you appreciate that.
Great. I very much appreciate that. He also urged me on stream to make sure that I stick to my word and finish the game eventually. So I will do my best, Bio. That is the goal, though who knows how long it will take.
Yeah, I was going to say, maybe in your retirement, but we'll see how it goes. Anyway, so this is our final episode, our true Final Fantasy final episode, where we'll do our takeaways, and then we've got a ton of feedback to get through. We're going to try to get through all of it and all caught up tonight. If we don't, I guess that's fine. We probably won't have a ton next week, so it'll be good to... But it'd be good to try to clear it out, because it's been building up for a while. I'm sorry to folks who've been waiting for us to read it, because I know it's been piling up over here. But that's partly why we're here for a 9th episode. We will start with takeaways, though, of course. At the end of each series, we, of course, like to do our takeaways, sort of our thoughts looking back on the series. This is a big, long game, and there's probably many smaller things that we could take away, but we'll try to hit some big ones that we think of looking back on it. So, as ever, sir, I throw it over to you for your first takeaway.
All right. I think there will be no surprise to this general takeaway that we probably both have and have talked about multiple times in various contexts. And this game is clearly one of the sort of progenitors of this whole concept. And I think looking back at the timeline, I'm wondering if it maybe was an inspiration to a lot of other RPGs after it. And this is really just that the takeaway itself is, I just wrote down, is the full commitment to character stories, or party member stories. And I put full commitment in there because I guess, at the end of the day, I feel like probably even more than, say, Chrono Trigger, in my memory, I feel like they went kind of above and beyond and fully embraced this concept that they were going to have these story threads that each of the potential party members, keyword being potential, because you may not really, some of them you might not find, and some of them you may not play very much with. So, it's that ye old optional content debate of, it's like, how far do you go with something that, that people may not engage with? And they just went full on with all of them. And for the most part, I mean, some are more than others, et cetera. And so it's not necessarily completely equal, but I guess I just was surprised. And I think in this era, we talked about this with Baldur's Gate, which is later. We talk, there's obviously the modern examples of this with the Mass Effect series and Dragon Age, and a lot of BioWare took this on, right? And it is a D&D trope for sure, but I don't know. They were maybe influenced by this stuff, but if you look back at like Western games that might have influenced them, whether it would be Ultima or gold box games or something like that.
Yeah,
back
Wizardry.
Wizardry. I don't really remember, I didn't play all of those, but I played a lot of them back in the day. I don't really remember characters being like deep character stories for each of your party members being that, that heavy of a focus. So I don't know.
I would agree. I think they really weren't, and the reason is because they leaned so heavily into D&D that the expectation was a lot of players are going to just not use the party that we built for them.
They're going to create their own.
Create their own party, right? And hit the random number generator as many times as they want to get, amazing scores or what have you for the abilities and stuff. So I feel like all those games you mentioned, Ultima probably least so because you've got like EOLO, and there's always some stories there. I think that probably some of the recurring characters that show up in Final Fantasy may owe themselves to things like EOLO the Bard, or I forget the ranger's name, but it's like Shimino maybe. I vaguely remember some of that. Yeah, but the main character is you, right? I mean, so there's that too. So you definitely, those other characters definitely take a back seat to the main character, the avatar. So
anyway, I mean, we talked about this, of course, with Final Fantasy IX, and we've talked about it, like I already mentioned, with Baldur's Gate, etc. But just because this is a 16-bit era, SNES original, I don't know, feels like I just did not. I knew this was a trope, so to speak, for the series, but I guess I didn't realize that this far back they would go this elaborate with this concept. And I don't know, the earlier ones, I don't know how much they did this, but I can just imagine that this is probably, as far as the 16-bit games, kind of the apex of doing this. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, I have only, earlier than this, I've only played the first game, which I played. They had I think it was a Game Boy Advance cart with the first two games. I only played the first one, and I actually feel like the party. I don't know. I feel like the party was more generic, and it was like the enemies that were a bigger deal. And the newest announced game, the Final Fantasy Zero prequel thing, they make a big deal about Garland, the knight who's basically the villain. As I recall, in Final Fantasy One, it's been a while, so I can't exactly be sure about that. I think that's the deal, right? That's the big deal. It's like, oh man, that's him before he becomes the grand villain who basically takes over the world in that first game. But I mean, the other thing I would say about this is that they do it in a great way. Very, as you mentioned, you might not have characters in your party, and certain mixes of them might generate more information, but they do it in what we would call, the sort of modern description of this would be storylets, just little bits of story that if you get enough of them, you see the pattern of the bigger story behind that character. So I think that's also really, really cool about that. So yeah, I will, since we're talking about characters, I will pair with that one of the things that I really appreciated about the game, which was that every character had their own combat mechanics. I thought that was a really wonderful, unexpected addition, something I didn't expect to see in this game. And although I wasn't always the best, it took me many times of them explaining to me how to do the blitz attacks on my stream, and I just was not getting it. I felt so obtuse. But so I ended up not using him very much because I was just so embarrassed by how badly I played him. But every character has a different thing they do, right? And it plays with the active time battle stuff in different ways. Of course, we both played with the weights, but even then, there's still just all these different weird things that they do, and that makes making your choices as to who's going to be in your party, be quite a number of factors that go into that. You might want to see more of somebody's story, but you also might just genuinely enjoy the things that character does in combat, the options that you have. I know a lot of people love Sabin because you get to suplex a train or whatever, but I really enjoyed playing Edgar and figuring out when I'm going to do his different, timed attacks and when is he going to go relative to the other ones. There's just the other characters, and then some of the weirder late game characters like Gogo, who I think has one line in the whole game, and then the rest of it he just does what other people do. It was just wild. So it's just a lot of stuff like that is some are more interesting than others, but they all have unique mechanics, and it really means that when you come down to that final dungeon where you've got 3 parties of 4, you're seeing something very different in every combat. And that's kind of striking to be able to see that late, in that game, considering how repetitive the combat seems to be, right? So I would pair that with the character development and the character forward nature of the story, with that also being true of the mechanics, at least surrounding the combat.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, that's a good point. They're good partners, for sure. And I mean, I didn't mention it specifically, but you called it out there of just the structure of the game. At the end, it actually required you to do this, but the structure of the game actually promoted using more characters than I feel like. Obviously, at the end, you had to have at least 4 or 3 parties of 4, and so I guess so, because you can once you get the airship, you could go straight to the tower no matter who you have in your.
It is possible to do that dungeon with 3 characters.
Yeah, that's crazy. So, I mean, just that concept, right? That it's they allow you to do that, but also they very much set it up to encourage you to use 12 characters, that's also kind of a bold thing. It's that both reinforce you to go around and find them and bring them back into the party, but also to have a dungeon at the end that actually encourages the use of more than just 4 characters. So it's sort of holistically, they really committed to this whole concept, like you said, mechanically, story wise, world structure wise, dungeon setup at the end. Then they have the lock dungeon, which is 2 parties.
2 parties, yeah.
So,
yeah. Also, I mean, the story stuff has sort of episodic structures, surrounding each character, which also, sort of I guess it was in the aughts. Sort of after both of us had left LucasArts, I think maybe around that time is when the conversation started. People started talking about how games might be better suited to being more like episodic television in terms of how their storytelling works. Mm-hmm. And here's a full decade before those conversations, having that structure, right? I mean, it's here's the episode where we go and get Edgar back, or Cyan, or what have you. So, yeah, it's pretty neat.
Yep.
Do you have another?
Yeah. So my next one is not the best title, but I just put down full world state changes. Really one major significant one, but they kind of had some small ones along the way too. And that kind of is a bit of a partner to the first one that I had, is just again, fully embracing this concept that is probably, A, hard to do at this time, B, something that that they're stretching the bounds of what they could possibly do in probably with being on a SNES, etc. And the concept that, it's sort of like that. It's that age old thing of, well, we would love to do this, but do we have the means to do it? And I feel like it's every time they ask themselves that, they would figure out a way to do whatever the idea was that they wanted to do. And here they're like, what if we just had a whole nother, world state that nobody saw coming, and you mentioned in previous episodes, not just that, but it's a failure to get to that point. Right. So it really is a big story shift. And in the previous episodes before that, right, you kept teasing I'll know it when I see it, and I was skeptical that would actually be as big as something that I would really like be that impressed by, but it ended up being the case. And and it's like, it turns into a whole nother game, which I know it sounds like it kind of becomes a bit of a trope for the series in general, for a lot of them at least. And so I don't know if this is the first one to kind of do something that big, but there's points before the Cataclysm where you think the world is pretty open, right? You get the first airship and you're like, oh, this is it. We've really hit the big time, and then that happens afterwards where it's like a whole nother thing. I mean, I'm never really a fan of the moving the goalpost problem of like, okay, I just got everyone together and now I have to go get them again. So there's downsides to that, but the commitment yet again to another part of the game being the world sort of status is pretty impressive.
Yeah, I took actually more of the story side of that, and called it just breaking the formula, because I do think, most games in this vein have either the chosen one story, or, or what have you. And in this case, right, of course, with the world ending and you lose, and you have to live with what remains, they really turn a lot of those stories on their head and make something new and fresh and exciting out of it, and really build their theme into it as well. Now, of course, you also at that point, brush yourselves off and then still triumph. But the world will never be what it was. So there is, there was a definite cost to that. But Terra is there, in her final confrontations, saying what this has meant to her, and others too. And I think that's pretty great. I mean, not only is she in some sense not the chosen one, I mean, you that's set up like, oh, of course she's the chosen one, right? She's got a foot in both worlds, and they're literally using all these things that make her special against her to break the world, to gain all this power. And that's tremendous. I mean, that's just really an unexpected thing. I mean, I knew about that thing, and even knowing that, I didn't realize to what degree they were going to take some of the big tropes in fantasy and turn them on their heads. And that one especially of making her really in some ways the cause of the world's demise, is kind of great. It's kind of great. And it really does. It breaks a lot of formulas. So that's what I had that pairs well with yours.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I one that I didn't put down on my list that you just jogged my memory on. I'll just do a small call out. The darkness that the story has, that the game has, is maybe not a full takeaway, but I think it bears mentioning just because, it's benefited by the presentation being in a 16-bit format, but and I think it's harder to get away with some of this stuff if you weren't in that format. But some rough stuff happens in this game that out of the 16-bit context would be pretty hard on kids especially. And of course we know that from people who have played this as kids, and email that we've gotten, that it, even in 16-bit format, it did have an impact on people. So but it goes some pretty rough places thematically.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, with Cyan's whole town being poisoned, like, oof, rough stuff. And it is very like the Joker, finally, poisoning Arkham, or poisoning the city, rather, Gotham, I should say. It's, even though it is playing with those sorts of tropes, it's still, it's going all the way, right? And not shying away from that stuff. And that's not what you think of when you think 16-bit games generally. So,
pretty adult themes. So my next one is more of a development and production related one, which I mentioned a fair number of times in the series. And that's really, it's getting the most out of what you have. And I guess this one for me comes down to being surprised time and time again about what they were able to get out of the system, what they were able to get out of their engine. Of course, we have Mode 7 in there, which I think they were masters at finding ways to use Mode 7 in interesting ways, especially with obviously all the overworld stuff. And then I mentioned a few times just getting emotion out of these tiny characters, before they didn't have these big CG cutscenes to lean on. We know they go there with 7, the next one, but they didn't have that here. So sometimes they would even use the battle engine as a way to show a cutscene. But I didn't mind it. I didn't feel like I was really missing much. I felt like the sprites themselves, the animations and the sprites themselves for the characters had a lot of different animation states and a lot of different emotes happening that fit really well with what was going on. Of course, we talked about the opera scene as a standout sort of, very memorable event that was clearly on everyone's mind who's played it before and written in and stuff. And so, doing a scene like that with just these little sprites, let alone the music that we talked about with Sebastian and the challenges that they would have had there technically. I just feel like as far as like a SNES game, and, I'm not saying that other SNES games didn't go above and beyond, but I just still I didn't have the privilege of playing this at the time on a cart on the SNES. But I think if I were a kid playing this, I just like flabbergasted at the scale and depth that they got out of this thing. It's a master class in that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I one of the things I guess I would pair with that, another takeaway I had was the sort of consistent presentation and how that, that consistent 16-bit presentation where the sprites are there everywhere, right? They just use them in everything. They're in the battles, they're in the sort of cutscenes, you're driving them around the overworld. It's all extremely consistently presented. And that is hard to achieve. I've talked before about, excellent art production where I look at what they do in terms of managing consistent pixel density, say, or making things of very disparate scale still look like it's part of the same world. Like that's something we maybe even talked about with Shadow of the Colossus, or not necessarily so much the first God of War, but later God of War games I think were really kind of amazing in that, especially the one with the Titans and stuff, where you'd have these huge characters in the environment at the same time as the human controlled character, and it just all looked exactly together, right? And you had said many times that consistent presentation really helped you get over some of the things that bother you about other Final Fantasies, right? With the modes and here, it was, although you had a lot more time wasted in just waiting for things to happen, here on a cart or an emulated cart, you're basically just slamming this stuff into memory constantly and just continues going. Like there are no pauses. Unfortunately in the PS1, more pauses, but that was a bummer.
But
I lost that time to it.
That consistency definitely contributed to my enjoyment for sure.
And then the other thing I'll just touch on there, because this was my other takeaway, these two things. You mentioned the opera scene, and I'd say what I take away from that is it's okay to really stretch yourself and even stretch beyond what your audience maybe is up for in some ways, right? I mean, if somebody had presented me, when I was 12 or 14 or whatever with, hey, check out this game, it's got an opera in it, I can pretty much tell you what my response would have been.
Yeah.
And yet in context and with the total commitment they give it, it just really works. And it's amazing. And it's because they push themselves and they trust that they've built up enough with their audience to go along with them on that journey, even though it's something that probably would have, repelled them had they known that was going to be a significant part of their experience. It really works. And it's because it's presented honestly, lovingly. You can see that they care, and it's not, I mean, there are some laughs and stuff in there, but that's good too, right? I mean, that's fine. Great. We've talked a lot about those sorts of things, but they really deliver. And it's a testament to how bought in we are. As Sebastian said last week, it's totally ridiculous. Like to get to this guy who's got this airship, you're going to go and substitute a non-singer into this opera, in the main part. I mean, it's patently, ridiculous because she sort of looks like the Maria or not. I forget what the actress name is that she replaces. But it's amazing. But they go, they buy all the way into that farce. And it's a full scale, like, I don't know, 18th century French farce or 19th century French farce, where it's just like something out of Moliere or something, where it's like, are you kidding me? This doesn't work. But it does because, of course, we don't see those differences. And right, we don't, that alienness of the opera music, is also like opera music is, as Sebastian pointed out, that it is kind of alien and weird. I don't know. It's just, it's a testament to a game like this that it can do those things, and people speak remarkably fondly of it. I mean, I can't tell you how excited people were when I was getting to that on the stream, and it was coming, and I'm just going like, oh my god, and they're just like, right, and I'm like, yeah, oh my god, it's amazing. Those are all of mine. I don't know if you have any others. You snuck in a little one there in the midst, but you might have more takeaways.
I just have one more. Yeah, one more that's we've kind of touched a little bit on, but it's in one specific sort of direction that I'm pulling on it, and that's merging exploration and linear story together. And what I mean by that is, like, it's actually very difficult to have a compelling overarching story that essentially has a beginning, middle, and end, but then also have non-linearity sort of sprinkled throughout that, in an exploration kind of way, as we've mentioned, in a sort of like go and find the characters for your party kind of way. They, in the beginning of the game, they're sort of secretly doled out to you as you're exploring, but you can go in different directions, right? And so you can find these things in different orders. But just the way that they wove all that together to make it work, and then still have this sense that I discovered, shadow in that cave or whatever, right? And that led to this or whatever. But it's just again a testament to, I think, the medium too, that you get your story combined with their story, right? Because you're going to do things in different orders, and they don't know exactly what order you're going to do things. Or to your point, like if you're a crazy person, you might finish the game with 3 characters, right? You wake up after the cataclysm as Celes, and I'm going to change my pronunciation to Celeste because Sebastian was saying Celeste, which I do.
Yeah, and I think that's right. Yeah,
do like better than Celes.
When he said that, I was like, oh my god, of course.
Yeah, I was like, yep.
And I don't know why I didn't think of it. We have a Celeste who is blonde in our D&D campaign.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So there's not only what order and and the explorative nature of finding all these little story tidbits and then putting them together in your own story, but there's also the sort of like scalability of you don't have to do everything. And then, just making that all work at this, again, in this era. And then still feeling this epic grand story with Kefka, at the center of it as the villain and stuff. Also, by the way, a pretty memorable villain, as villains go in this era too, I'd say. Yeah. And I mean, just like that merging of those two things is pretty tricky to do, in my opinion. And looking back now, as an influence on the industry and the art form and on other, game developers, I can definitely see this game for anyone who did play it as a kid and became a game developer. I can see this as a template or blueprint for, fooling with those sorts of things. So.
Yeah, that's well said. It does feel like, we say every time, talking about their relevance and impact today, and this does feel like, certainly from a narrative standpoint, all the things we've talked about, it really does feel like one that has had a pretty deep impact in that way.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
So we're still always talking about how to tell stories in that way, right? I mean, it's a perennial discussion, right? And they found really good answers for the technology of their time. And I think a lot of those would still work today. And unfortunately, they're a little harder to achieve because of the expense.
The biggest thing that's changed since then has been the expense of it, and so that's why it's been harder and harder to justify game structures like this, because it costs so much to do this much sort of malleability with player choice and a grand scale, so. Right. I mean, so much that the remake of Final Fantasy VII is coming out in episodes, right? It's so big and so expensive that they had to figure out a different way to have it released, and so I think that's a good example.
Yeah. I mean, this is, it's also, it's harder and harder to justify that not everybody's going to see all the content, because the content's so expensive to produce. But also the flip side of that is like, there's sort of, an expectation of a minimum length, say, right? And if you have a lot of stuff that's optional, and it's really expensive, then it sort of starts to feel like, well, unless they go and find all the optional stuff, it's not going to feel worth the sticker price, basically, right? And so there's that too of like, even though relatively speaking, like in today's dollars, I think this game would be more expensive than what we pay for games today. I think that's true. It's close anyway. It's at least on parity, and I think maybe a little bit more. I'd have to go and look at inflation, things like that, because the game industry does not raise the price of its games in line with how much they cost to develop, really. I know people hate what they cost right now and how they've basically been jumping here in this latest generation, but and so many other ways to pay for games. Like a lot of models have moved to other avenues of revenue, but anyway, we don't need to talk about the economics too much, but it's something we think about, right? So it's and how it's hard to do things like that, like this these days. I feel like Deus Ex had this kind of model too in some ways, right? That there was so much variance of and then a lot of that was very centered on like your specific choices and how you build your character and all that stuff, and that's very hard to do today.
Well, and I mean the good news is there are definitely those who are in control of the budgets, who understand that some of the best games out there are the ones that they give you those choices, and even though it's expensive to make them, at the end of the day they become more memorable for players, and you end up making that money back by the end, right? Because you're hopefully selling more copies because it's so big or so many options or what have you. So luckily there's people
there's
are
still people
getting
out there.
it.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's tough. It's tough for sure. Well, those I guess are our takeaways. Thanks for playing along. Those of you who did, we're going to get to all of your email real soon. But I know it's come to the moment you all wait for, which is Brett's book recommendation,
right?
For the Final Fantasy VI series. It's a kind of a downer this time. Going to be right up front with that. This game had so much to say to me in terms of our current warming planet that I figured I should recommend, people read just one book on climate change if they haven't. The one I picked was specifically The Uninhabitable Earth, Life After Warming by David Wallace Wells. Came out a couple of years ago. It's quite a book. I recommend it. I read a lot more than that, but that is one that I can definitely recommend. It's not a super long book. It is dire, but not, it's just dire because the science is dire. It's not specifically a downer book. I mean, he's looking at, what can be done, and what might be done, and, how are we going to deal with this? And he's just reporting what he's able to find. So I had other books in mind, but really when it came right down to it, this was something I mentioned connecting specifically with that after the beginning of the World of Ruin, the midpoint of the game, and how strongly that connected with me, especially running into that character said, we had this great thing, and now, it's gone. And we didn't hardly realize what we had. So, and it, I don't know, that just resonated. And that's, when I had that conversation, I knew what my book recommendation was going to be this time. So that's the book, The Uninhabitable Earth.
That's a good one. Yeah. It's, it is funny how that theme, that's a story theme that I didn't anticipate, right? Just sort of like the concept of that cataclysm or nuclear holocaust or what have you. Playing Death Stranding right now, right, for the stream with similar themes of, how do you deal with that kind of stuff and the science behind it. It's kind of fascinating, but
well, cool. Well, then in that case, it is in fact time for us to turn to email, and we have a lot of it. And a lot of long emails. So strap in. We will try to get to as many as we can. I don't know if we'll get to them all, like I said, but we can probably tuck some into next week as well. We will alternate, sir. So, of course, as always, you will go first.
Okay, the first email is that game with the secrets. Read after finishing Final Fantasy VI from Logan Wells. Okay, well...
close enough.
Yeah, close enough. I've had things spoiled, so and probably I'll appreciate it more by reading this. Personal history with Final Fantasy VI. Or he said, "Hi, Brett and Tim. Personal history with Final Fantasy VI. Although it was the first Final Fantasy game I ever played, Final Fantasy VI was actually one of the last ones I completed. Oh, interesting. When I was a kid, my family would rent a game for the weekend, and one weekend." That game was Final Fantasy VI. I'd never experienced another game like it. Where most console games were very linear, Final Fantasy VI felt like a game where you could go anywhere and have a wealth of secrets waiting to be discovered. Like Tim, I accidentally discovered the hidden staircase in the drafty room, and to this day, I always hug the wall in JRPGs because you never know what you'll find. But that weekend, I couldn't figure out how to pull off the blitzes, and so never beat Vargas.
Vargas is the one with the two bears, I believe. Right after you first meet Sabin. Yeah,
got it. Okay, so Final Fantasy
has two pets by that bridge. There's like a rope bridge where you meet him.
Yeah. So Final Fantasy VI went back to the store, and it was 10 years before I ever saw it again, though I wouldn't recognize it when I found it. The next weekend, I asked for that Final Fantasy game, and my well-intentioned mom brought back Final Fantasy II, aka Final Fantasy IV. I was very confused by the new game. How the heck does this story about wizards and paladins connect to the one where the magic died 1,000 years ago? But eventually finished it, and from then on, I was hooked. I bought the PlayStation for Final Fantasy VII. I bought the PlayStation 2 for Final Fantasy X. And one day I discovered the Final Fantasy Anthology. Imagine my shock when I realized this re-release was of Final Fantasy VI, Final Fantasy III, as I always knew it, was actually that game I had started years ago. Now imagine my shock when I learned several years later that you could, in fact, save Shadow. Wow. Yeah. Unfortunately, recent Final Fantasy games don't offer that same level of exploration. I assume because of rising development costs. Wow, this is very appropriate, Mail.
Yep.
For our discussion. Good job, Logan. The game worlds have become increasingly linear, and the last time a Final Fantasy game offered secret characters was in Final Fantasy VII. Still exploring the map's far corners with an airship were often my favorite moments in the older games. I've just had to turn to other titles to get that same experience. And then this is this is the same mail. Okay, so that was section 1.
Yep. Yes.
So really good points about what we just talked about, Logan. You read our minds. So section 2, who's the protagonist of this game anyway, which we did talk about from time to time. As I alluded to last time, the main character of this game is a common topic for Final Fantasy fans. Terra or Celes are popular choices, but I've also heard arguments for Edgar, nope, or Locke, maybe. This is especially confusing as Celes doesn't start giving off protagonist vibes until the Opera House, and you can beat the game without having either Terra or Locke in your party, though Terra will swoop in during the final cutscene. You can't even make the blank slate argument like you can with Chrono Trigger, because most characters have their own character arc. It just feels like they get cut short if you don't pull it in an extra effort to put in the extra effort to re-recruit them. I have my own theory, but please allow me to some indulgences, as I've wanted to discuss this for several years now. Pulls out a cue card, stands on a soapbox, adjusts imaginary tie, clears throat. Celes and Terra were originally a single protagonist. What? If true, a lot of wrinkles in Final Fantasy VI's narratives would straighten out. Instead of a sudden narrative shift to Celes and the world of Ruin, we'd largely maintain a single POV from beginning to end. Celes and Terra also have very similar backstories, orphans with mysterious magical powers conscripted into the Empire. And once you've recruited both, one is always mysteriously absent when the other is driving the plot. I'm not sure why Square would split up the main character like this, but it just fits so well. However, since I last investigated this, the Final Fantasy fan wiki has also been sleuthing. According to dev interviews, Final Fantasy VI was designed with an ensemble cast in mind, and it was an arbitrary decision to make Celes the midpoint POV character. And the similarities, they say, are due to Celes being an intentional foil for Terra. Still, I will not be deterred. I stand by that at some point, even if just an outlining phase, these two were the same person. Brett, Tim, I need you to use all the resources at your disposal to unravel this mystery for me. Best, Logan. Whew. Wow.
Yeah, that's a big matzo ball, as they say. I mean, I could actually see, for production reasons, splitting up the characters. You know, it's a nice thing to put on the. Logan had also sent in a bunch of secrets, but they're all things that we've previously discussed. So I appreciate them coming in. He did also send in one that was kind of alarming. It is Celes is actually Edgar and Sabin's long lost triplet. This one's hard to discover, but if you revisit South Figaro with all three of them in your party and have Celes wear the memento ring while at the inn, then nothing will happen, because now I'm just messing with you. But I had you going, didn't I?
Is that what he wrote?
That's what he wrote. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. I wanted to get that in. All the other secrets he had mentioned, we had covered. We have a bunch of other ones coming later that I don't think we have covered. But I mean, I could see that happening, right? I mean, you find a new wrinkle on the story, right? It wouldn't make a lot of sense for Locke and Terra to be love interests. I don't think that I think Terra's story is already full without adding that element, right? Yeah. And so, I can sort of see splitting that character so you can give more room for that to breathe, because, they have to have things that kind of set up that relationship, like there's that scene in, I guess it is South Figaro. You stay in the inn there and you can see a scene on their way somewhere. I can't remember now. But so I feel like there is, there's some stuff to do there. And also having, a character who connects with Sid, which Terra might not, because of what Sid has done to, her people, or at least, her father's people. We didn't even touch on the whole, world of the Espers either. That whole middle section with Maduin and Terra's mother. Another kind of amazing thing that they went for and just did. Yeah, I mean, I could see that happening for story reasons, and I could see that sort of developing kind of naturally as they broadened out other characters and things like that. I would caution, reading too much into that as like, these things do happen, like things change. Like I can remember about Skyrim, somebody writing and saying, well, clearly you wanted, they had done a bunch of data archaeology or whatever to see what else we had planned for something, and they were like, well, clearly, such and such feature was meant to be much bigger. And it's like, well, yes and no. I mean, it was sort of like, well, we tried this thing, it didn't really come across very well. It was hard to communicate. And so we just kind of abandoned it and slimmed it down and made it something different. That isn't really like we cut this planned thing. It was more like, well, we tried a thing, it didn't work, right? I think the same thing happens with story development. You start out with a thing, you're like, yeah, this doesn't really gel well because, this person would, we'd like to have a person who connects with Sid, for example. So, it doesn't quite work. Well, what if we have another character who fills some of the same roles, so that if you have them, you can sort of swap them out for the abilities that they have or whatever. Like you just see how that sort of stuff happens. Whether or not it was there from the beginning this way or not, it's more just the natural consequence of developing and editing a story and breaking it down and trying to contain the themes you want it to contain, and just seeing where things don't fit and go, well, you know what, maybe that needs to be a different person or cut or whatever. So yeah, I think those things happen, especially with big sprawling stories like these, and having additional characters is often an asset, right, to marketing. You can play 15 characters, 14 characters, whatever it is, instead of 12, seems silly to say, but it is a genuine conversational topic at the time anyway, to have with marketing. So I don't know. Yeah, that's my thinking there.
Well, I mean, yeah, and I hate to disagree with Logan, but I think I guess response, and not theory, but response to what he's pitching here, that is more of a personal preference, and why I think maybe I see more of a creative logic in what they ended up doing here. I actually really liked the contrast between the two characters, because Terra was basically, my understanding, at least from the game when I played it, Terra being essentially enslaved and controlled by that headband that she had on or something, and being sort of like in a different sort of like relationship with the Empire, versus Celeste, who was working for the Empire, both magical, but she was a general, right, or something, or some sort of officer. And so I actually liked that there was a contrast. It's very Star Warsian as well, sure, right? You have the rebel, and you have the Imperial stormtrooper that turns into a rebel, or the kid who wants to be a stormtrooper and then realizes, oh no, I want to be a rebel, and so you have that contrast. So it's sort of like Terra's the Jedi, and and Celeste is more of the Finn or something from the new ones. But I just liked that contrast between the two of them. So I don't think you could have gotten so much depth out of the game with them, together. So maybe that is a reason why they split them up, but I don't know. It feels like as far as archetypes go, they fit into good buckets pretty easily for me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. Well, there you go, Logan. Sorry to burst your bubble, but other podcasts tackle this issue, I'm sure, and maybe these theories will have better purchase there. We thank you for the email, sir. I have one here from Wes. The subject is Final Fantasy remake? Question mark. Hello. So based on your gameplay of Final Fantasy 3/6, and I hope you also tackle the SNES Final Fantasy 2/4 at some point, would you want to see a remake of these games in the same style as Final Fantasy 7 Remake? You mentioned about how Final Fantasy 6 and how it seems that the developers finally mastered storytelling just before transitioning to CGI. Feels like developers have once again mastered storytelling with today's graphic styles, and this may be fitting for a return to these stories told in a new format. You think this is a possibility in the future based on your industry experience and how they approach things? Also, as I always get reminded of this series of games when talking about Final Fantasy, do you see any of the Sega Genesis versions of Phantasy Star in the podcast future? Somehow this one snuck past my filter. I feel like that's another series that's been forgotten and more people would enjoy. Great job on the podcast. Yeah, I had a couple of Wes from Dallas-Fort Worth. I had a couple of emails which were suggestions for games to play, and I don't normally read those, and this was in there, and I was into reading it before I realized that that's what this was at that point. So we won't really comment on whether we'll play Phantasy Star. I would say never say never, just generally, but we haven't specifically spoken about it. So what's your thoughts about, without sort of thinking about whether it's a possibility, I guess everything's possible. What would you want this?
After almost finishing the game, I will say no. I think that some things are best left alone.
Yep.
And I can't speak for Final Fantasy VII, of course, because I haven't played that. And that one was sort of like, because it was the first 3D one, you could almost see a little bit more justifiable to do a remake that is also 3D. But I feel like, and I would say the same thing for Chrono Trigger. Like, I don't think either of those games should be remade. It's sort of like, it's that sort of the same thing comes up with film from time to time, right? Like, some classic films that just shouldn't be.
Remember when things were being colorized by I forget what it was, TNT, TBS, I don't know, whatever, Turner anyway.
So that's my personal opinion, but I just think that this game, and again, I kick myself for not playing it on the SNES Classic. I couldn't find one, to be honest, easily. But because, I think that the reason I bring that up is I think like the emulated version that I was playing is not the best way to play it, but in its purest form of the SNES version, it feels like, a near perfect kind of game that you just don't want to mess with. So.
Yeah, I'm actually in the same camp. I very much believe that games are a product of their time and technology and the constraints under which they were built. And rather than see games remade in, from those templates, I'd rather see what we come up with the constraints we currently have, like, which technically speaking are significantly less from a technology standpoint. A lot of the constraints we choose now are constraints we choose for ourselves, or in some cases are dictated by the market. And those are different sorts of constraints. And I just think fundamentally they are, products of their time and should be sort of read in that context, like you would read on a novel from 50 years ago or what have you, or 100 or 200 years ago or whatever, or see a play or, whatever, see a film, like you say. I think the one thing I would like to see that our industry is notoriously bad at is better preservation of these games, so it's possible to play them and play them in some sense in a format that's close to what they were, with appropriate historical background. I would love there to be more information about the industry for people to dig into. Like, there's a museum of film and television, in New York City, where you can literally, if you remember, like any American TV show ever made, you can get. Like, you can go in there on a day and just go in and sit down and have them bring you, whatever format they have. I'm sure a lot of it's digitized now. Last time I went there was in the 90s. So it was all like reel-to-reel tapes and stuff. But, like they had rooms for everything. They had televisions everywhere. This was before television formats changed. And you could just watch something, in your $100 a year membership you had to this museum. You could go in and watch like literally anything. And we just don't have that, and we'll probably never have that because of, I don't know, really. Honestly, I don't really fully understand why, but we won't. It's I think maybe too fractured.
Business.
Television was somewhat easier to do that for because the technology was stable for longer and there were fewer players, so a little bit easier to do. And and our industry is very different and certainly a lot younger, and the technology is constantly changing besides. So it's hard to do, but that is what I would actually wish for rather than remakes. So
yeah, that's good. Yeah, good point.
All right, let's tackle another couple, shall we?
Okay.
Just getting started.
Yeah, serious. All right. The next one is Secret Shame Update from Mikael Danielson. Hello, sir. Greetings, gentlemen. You asked for me to keep you posted, and so I shall. I've been playing the game regularly since your first episode, and now I'm around 70 hours into my grand adventure, but there is most likely some idle time in that number. I've been doing a lot of optional endgame content lately, searching for hidden dungeons and all those pesky dragons. I've yet to find the last two, and it feels like I'm running out of places to look for them. Oh, we might be.
Well, if you've been listening to the podcast, I might have given that away. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought I'd join in on your discussion about the characters and party composition. While I've been trying to level most of them evenly, my main party has often been Terra, Celes, Relm. Yes. Good choice, Mikhail. And rounding out the team with either Locke or Sabin. This is my party. Partly because I've been focusing heavily on magic, but they're also just the characters I like the most. I did, however, use Edgar quite a bit as well, because of the strength of his tools, but I would never fault anyone for not wanting to associate with him. Edgar, we've I think cemented the Edgar debate to some degree. One advantage of using him in a magic heavy party is his tool debilitator. Oh, I don't know. I didn't find that. And that makes any enemy, even bosses, weak to a random element.
Yep.
Oh, weird. Random
you
element.
Can buy it. You can buy it in his from that vendor in his castle.
Huh. Interesting. How do you find out do you know what the random element is, or do you have to do a scan?
I feel like it tells you. I think it tells you when you use it.
Yeah. That's pretty huge. Wow.
Yeah, although I was still far too under-leveled to use it against the first time I encountered a dragon. I tried it just to weaken it against something so I could use more spells on it, because I hadn't maxed out all the elemental spells at that point. So I was like, well, maybe I can, have two people casting things against it, but I was still getting trashed. Anyway.
Okay, he goes on. But now that I've increased my magic power quite a bit, thanks to the Esper's bonus stats on the level up, I thankfully have no further need of Edgar's services, though constantly switching Espers back and forth to get both bonuses and learning all the spells can really be tiresome work. On another topic, I seem to remember you once asking about what Terra's special ability actually did. In her other form, she both does more damage and takes less damage. Apologies if someone already answered that. I couldn't remember if that was the case or not. Huh. Why would you... does more damage and takes less. Why would you ever not be in that form then? Yeah, I never figured that.
She can't. I don't think she can cast spells in that form.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I didn't understand it myself, so I just never ended up using it. I just doubled down on her spells. He goes on, fun fact about that ability, in case no one had said anything about this earlier. While it's called morph in my version, a more direct translation of the original Japanese would have been trance, which might bring back memories of Final Fantasy IX. There's even a similarity in the color scheme with the bright white and pink. Don't remember that. Trance.
Yeah.
Kind of vaguely remember that.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember too, but it's not coming right to me. So
yeah. Finally, a quick questing for Tim. Since you're also playing on the PS3, I was wondering if you've experienced any input lag. It seems to be a permanent feature for me, and while it's only been a very slight delay, it certainly has been annoying at times. Sorry for the long mail. Stay safe and take care, Mikhail. Yes, I'm afraid that again, I will warn everyone off of not. Sorry, I should have told you earlier, Mikhail, before. But yeah, I think there's obviously the emulated load times, which are really, I think, for this kind of game, kind of really terrible. And then the input lag, I'm pretty positive is happening somehow as well, specifically with Sabin, because I do use his blitzes quite heavily, especially Fire Dance. And I would say Fire Dance triggers, 60, 70% of the time. And the rest seem to be, some sort of lag or some sort of weird input bugs or something. So yeah, it's not, I don't know what's happening. I don't know if it's my controller or what. I thought it might be my controller, but if he's mentioning input lag, then it could be that as well. But some basically false positives or something on certain inputs. Even in menu, sometimes I'm like, I'm sure I pressed that button, and then press it again, and then it goes. So,
yeah, that's wild. I mean, I've had issues like that, but I've always assumed they were me, especially with Sabin. And I'm sure they are in my case. I mean, I'm playing it on effectively the best you could do without actually getting a SNES and a cartridge at this point. So yikes, that's rough.
yeah.
That's rough. All right, I have one here. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Mikhail. And it's good. You have a good party there. Good work.
Here's one that is from Sam Relm. It's actually two. I've stitched together two from Sam, so that I could have something competitively lengthy. Relm sketch glitch. Guys, I feel compelled to share more about this glitch. I actually found it myself, but didn't know about the invisibility aspect. I triggered it by sending Gao away on the Veld and sketching him when he comes back, but before he rejoins your party. If you can manage to save and reload afterwards, you will have your new inventory, but none of the other glitches. Note, I didn't exhaustively test this. With some trial and error, you can have 255 of some of the best rare equipment in the game. Too bad having General Leo in my party didn't persist. Finding this glitch is one of my favorite memories from all of gaming, and I miss the days when I didn't have many games available and tried weird stuff in my favorites. Yeah, I like that too, actually. And then his other email that came in maybe a week afterwards or so. Again, these have been piling up. The subject is Ultima, not always great. This was in response to my description of the spell Ultima as being the best spell in most of the Final Fantasy games. He says, hey, Brett and Tim, feel free to just read off air or summarize, but I thought you'd get a kick out of this story. Brett mentioned that the Ultima spell is always the strongest, but that wasn't the case in Final Fantasy II due to a hard-headed programmer. I knew you'd like this aspect of the story, Tim, so I'm reading it as is. Just to give you, this is in quotes, just to give you an idea of how useless it was, this is from Silicon Era. I'll put the link in the show notes. Just to give you an idea of how useless it was, in the NES version of the game, Ultima was initially meant to increase its power relative to the level of other spells the caster had. But due to a bug, it caused the spell to do just around 500 damage at the most on a single target. Mine does 99.99, so, it's a little little bit different.
Yeah.
At the time when Square tested the game out and saw the Ultima bug, it was definitely a problem, and Sakaguchi said, "How did this happen? Fix it." However, the person that programmed it replied with the following statement: "All of that legendary stuff, it dates back to an age that didn't even have proper techniques. If you were to look at such things now in the present's point of view, it would be natural that they look inferior. For this reason, it's a given that Ultima's abilities would be bad. As for those who struggled and ultimately acquired it only to find out that it's useless, well, that's something that often happens in life. So I'm not going to fix it." There, I'll give the full article link in the show notes. But thanks for sending that along. I did. I feel like I caught that somehow. I don't remember how that came in. I don't know. Like whenever you search, like I search Final Fantasy VI for the soundtrack stuff every week to put in the show bookends, and it's very possible that just triggered this stuff to be surfaced to me in things like Google News or whatever. And so I had actually seen this, but it is still pretty amazing. And I will send people to that article.
That's pretty hilarious. That's the best will not fix response.
Yes. I have a philosophical opposition to fixing this bug, and it is this. I'm going to keep that one in my back pocket. So,
yeah. I can see that coming. Pretty
Shall
good.
we try two more? Do we have time for two more? One more? No more? Up to you.
Yeah, we can keep going for a little bit. See, okay. My last one's pretty long, but it might be possible. Okay, so next one, Going Crazy, the Uncanny Valley, and What We Have Lost, from Johnny Pockets. Hi, Pockets. Good day, gentlemen. I wanted to ask about the topic you have been touching on, Final Fantasy VI. I have never played a Final Fantasy game, but I like the idea that in 6, the developers were able to, paraphrasing Tim, go crazy and implement whatever idea they came up with. You contrast this with modern games, which need to be much more focused about what they can do or what they do. Can you give a better sense of why this thread has happened? It feels like we have lost something when our big ticket games are conservative in this sense. Intuitively, it seems it should be the opposite. Programming surely has become easier to execute on. I guess Final Fantasy VI was written in assembler, mostly assembly or assembler. Is that assembler?
Both.
Both.
Are fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which for me makes the fact that Pockets is he knows this stuff. And they completed the game at all staggering. Today, however, with high level language, the tools and the frameworks we get to build our games with, the developer's output must be orders of magnitude greater. You mentioned the graphical style as a big factor. We are striving for high fidelity and having to claw our way out of the Uncanny Valley because of it. This takes a long time to do, but does that explain it all? Maybe it would help to contrast it with modern games that are stylized, like a Mario game, and so do not have the Uncanny Valley quote-unquote problem. Do these more stylized games have the freedom like 6 did? I speculate that with enough technical advancement, we no longer start our game development deep in the Uncanny Valley. Then maybe we can go back to going crazy and implementing whatever we want. Thanks so much for all you do, Pockets.
I want to note he also sent in a recommendation of a podcast. I guess I'll put that in the show notes as well, but I knew we had a lot to read tonight, so I cut that part out. So thank you for the recommendation, Pockets. I will also forward it on to Tim. So I mean,
it's a huge topic.
It's a huge topic, but games are a lot more complex to build, even though the tools are better. I feel like the tools are never catching up to our ambitions. For example, to make art of the quality, that you speak of, that climbs out of the Uncanny Valley, it takes oodles of time longer, right, than to make a well-constructed pixel-based sprite, for example. Than to make something like a fully realized character who then gets articulated and what do they call that again? God, I just drew a blank for animation. Rigged. with a skeleton that can be animated in whatever, degrees, of freedom it needs to be, which are many these days. And each of this is a different person often, right? You might have a technical artist or an animation tech who's doing the rigging. And then, you have an animator who's using those many bones to actually animate this character. Of course, when you try to do stuff, you find out it's not really set up to do this thing well. So things have to go back around to capture the things that you need to do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the technology to do these things at each stage is not really fully there. Like there aren't a lot of assistive technologies to make that go more smoothly, because of course you're basically like sculpts, for example, which are, very, very high poly, modeling tools to basically sculpt, and it's sort of procedural and like it's stored in a different way and then rendered kind of at different levels of fidelity depending on what you're doing, and like goes wicked low level when you rotate it or anything like that for performance. These tools are strange. Like I've watched artists use them online and I'm like, wow, they really know what they're doing, but it is so prone, like to get that fidelity is so prone to like lots and lots of iteration on any small part of a model, and it has to be just remarkable. I don't know. I mean, I think, making things of that level of fidelity, and that's the art aspect, but I think there's a similar complexity in the coding as well, in terms of what the systems have to do to interact with one another. I mean, we have to schedule a million animations and blend them all together and, and figure out how that's all going to be weighted. Some of that we have help with from middleware. Some of it we don't. I don't know. I feel like we're always outstripping, what we're doing, and it was even when we're at the end of life cycles, we're essentially working on machines now that are just more and more powerful PCs. So there's really they're both is and isn't an end of a cycle anymore. In some ways, there's really just more and more incredible horsepower and concomitant, expectations from fans. So I don't know. I feel like this is a endless treadmill.
Yeah. I think that's basically the answer. I think that, I guess we use a term velocity in lots of software development, lots of development of manufacturing. I'm sure lots of different creation industries with creation use velocity. But I feel like velocity, despite our best efforts to create tools that can aid in the creation of difficult things like Brett's talking about, as much as we do focus on that stuff, the velocity is just sort of like slow. It's very gradually slowing, I feel like, with each generation to some degree, to a large degree. It depends sometimes on the genre. For instance, like Valheim as an example, right, is a pretty clever genre that allows a small group to do a lot. But that game's also not done, by the way. Very good game, but it's early access. But to Brett's point, I think he nailed it on the head earlier of just like our ambitions will. I mean, it's the same problem with the technology itself. Like, I have completely stopped caring about specs. And I know that's probably weird to say as somebody who is professionally working in the current generation and beyond. But the constraints will always be there. Like the concept that the teraflops this time, or the amount of RAM, or the whatever the processor is doing is better. And it's like, we finally hit the big time. We got this much RAM. It's like, nope, like we will fill it. There will be limitations. There's nothing we can do about it because, like Brett said, our ambitions will always outstrip the tools and the technology and the hardware. And I think that's how it should be to some degree. I think creators are always going to want to push harder on stuff, but because of the complexity, like Brett said, the cost of doing something simple, like, that took a few frames in a sprite in Final Fantasy VI takes 3 people to do 2 weeks to do some sort of complex facial animation or something. that just adds up. If you look at some of the games out there that you could say maybe get close to boasting that they did whatever they wanted to, maybe you say Cyberpunk did that, and then what happened? I'm not trying to throw shade or anything. I'm just trying to say making Cyberpunk is freaking difficult. And they probably did have a mantra of, we're going to go crazy and implement whatever we want. And it sounds like they kind of did. But it comes at, a tricky cost. Being a big fan of Witcher 3 as an example, right? I think another game that gets close to, they had an idea and they found a way to implement it for the most part. But there's always limitations. I think there's just a huge advantage. I think anyone working in high fidelity games like we do always look back at these old 16-bit games. And I think it's a reason why a lot of, veteran developers go back and start making indie games in 16-bit because they long for those days where you could move, you could push those pixels, no pun intended. And that's all you need to do. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think I'm overstating what Brett's already said, but I think it's that sort of that self-fulfilling prophecy where I don't know if we'll ever quite get back to that in that same way.
I would actually say it constrains us more because of the market pressure than because of the expense to deliver something that's a less risky bet, right? I mean, you look at the blockbusters of the past 10 years or more, 50, I don't know, when was the first Marvel movie, right? They're telling increasingly the same story. Like, I mean, you watch enough of those movies and I know the differences in the details and all that stuff, but like the amount of money it takes to put that spectacle on the screen means they have to go with a surefire formula. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've listened to like a film or culture podcast and had them say, yeah, and then the last 20 minutes is this big, series of explosions, and no matter how well choreographed it is, it's sort of like at the same point, it's just the same thing. Like take an example. I think one of the last superhero movies I saw was that Wonder Woman movie. And I was like, man, that a really compelling first third, sort of compelling second third. And then, then it had to be a superhero movie at the end, right? And have the big punch fest with the explosions, and I was just like, yeah, and I kind of didn't care anymore. And that was a movie that I was like, that was genuinely cool. Especially that first third, which showed stuff that we hadn't really ever seen in that format before, with a female hero like that. Mm-hmm. And in some sense they are trapped into this formula because they need to go to the lowest common denominator. The other thing I'll say is like, I think Romero may have even said this on our podcast, but I've certainly heard him say it before. Like, it took a day to build a Doom level. It took a couple weeks to make a Quake level. And by the time you get to like, I don't know, a Rage level or something like that, it takes months, to make a level. And it's really not going into the freeing us up direction, in my opinion. And I feel like we're always just going to be chasing after something, and it's going to take too long to bring the tools up to snuff. So we're going to be using what tools we have. So.
Yeah. And I think there's certain clever, like I mentioned, Valheim. I haven't played it, but Brett and I have a mutual friend who's obsessed with Stardew Valley, he and his wife. And Stardew Valley, I think, is another kind of good example of, it obviously that's pixel as well, but when it comes to picking a genre and picking a style that marries well with the concept of go crazy and implement whatever idea you want, like that's the impression I get from Stardew Valley. It seems like a very robust game where there's a lot of different things that you can do. Valheim, which I still play, flabbergasts me still to this day about how far they went with so few people. But you have to make other trade-offs like they did with style and such, building that in Unity. And so that's, you can get that still that you can accomplish that goal. I think you just now these days you have to make different trade-offs. And I think you mentioned, Johnny, in your mail, is sort of that concept of focusing, which is a big word that I use today too, to help hopefully make high quality and still not blow your budget or kill your people or something, through crunch or something. But that's kind of required for, it's just which kind of focus are you going to do, and you could sort of you could say that about some of these pixel games. Their focus that they chose was to focus on the style side of it and make sure that that is not a factor that they have to worry about as much, and then chose to focus on depth or something. So yeah, but anyway, as you can see, we can talk about it forever. It's an interesting, wacky topic for us, but I guess I got to go now. So
yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, we've come up against your streaming time. I just tweeted on your behalf to let people
thank
know
you.
we're finishing up recording, so you'll be on in a few minutes. So we should tidy up with our outro stuff. The first of those things we'll get to. We have a few more mails. We'll get to those next week. The first thing to say is we're going to be playing a favorite of mine. The first in a series I have played many of. I think I have played 8 games in the series. I think that's right. It might be 7. And that is, it might be, no, I think 7. That is the Ratchet and Clank series. And we're going to be playing, I guess, via PS3. The trilogy is available on that for download from the store. Thankfully, they have not taken that store down, so we can still get those games. We'll play the first one. I think what we're going to do is just start with the first level. As I recall, I've actually played through this game fully 4 times.
Oh, I didn't realize it was that many times.
Well, I played it once all the way through and then did a New Game Plus on PS2, and then I did it again with the trilogy. So on the PS3.
Okay.
No, I'm happy to.
This. Yeah.
I love this. I played all 3 of those games, 4 times each. I love the Ratchet and Clank series, so I'm happy to revisit it. Always happy to revisit a Ratchet and Clank. Though I don't think I'm going to shell out for a PS5 just yet for to try to play a bonus episode. Though I hear that game's kind of amazing. Anyway, fantastic game. I'd love to talk about some of the technical choices they make, and how it plays really well with the PS2. So I'm looking forward to talking about that. We'll aim to play that first level, which, as I recall, has a lot of sort of story stuff to kind of set up what's going on and this new friendship between the titular characters, and then, of course, all the sort of tutorial stuff. I feel like the one thing we'll miss out on, I don't actually know if this is true. I can't remember what they did in the trilogy, if they made all the control schemes consistent or not. Because I feel like that was a series whose controls got better and better over the first 3 games, and then they kind of solidified and they became the one way to play it. But I feel like there was some weird button combos and things like that in the original game that they just dropped in later games and made it even easier to play. But we'll see how it goes. I can't remember if that is true of the trilogy or not. It's a very faithful trilogy, so they may have kept the original button mappings. I really don't remember, even though I did play a lot of it. Including getting all the achievements, one of which meant leaving my PS3 on overnight to gather up 1 million bolts. Yep, I did that.
All right,
so look forward to that next week. Yeah. Thank you for your reviews or thank you for your email, rather, to devgameclub@gmail.com. And of course, we love reviews as well. If you shoot some of those our way, if you haven't had a chance in the past, or just, tell a friend. Of course, we don't advertise this in any way. This is just kind of a labor of love from us. And so, any way we grow the audience is great. It's all word of mouth. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com or on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
Which is also your Twitch account, where you are currently late to streaming Death Stranding tonight. What's going on with Die Hardman and
there's something going on.
Sam Bridges?
Sam Bridges, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And his mother, the president?
Yep. now sister.
Now his sister's the president.
The president.
Yep, of course.
Yep. Yep. I'm to chapter 9. Seems like a significant chapter. I think I am at the West Coast now. Great sequence getting there through the sort of tar section, which people will know what I mean. Go and watch the stream archive if you want to see. Pretty cool stuff. And I'm on chapter 9. So
you were in La Brea.
Yes, they have a very well. So you joke, but it's like there is a big fossil theme with the story now. So there actually are some correlations with that. Yeah,
because Hideo Kojima is a fossil. Is that what you're saying?
Oh no, that's not what I'm saying. That's what you're saying. Yeah, it's a crazy game. Yeah, of course. But yeah, I think I don't know if chapter 9 is the last chapter or not, but it is the chapter title of the villain. So I feel like I'm getting there, or at least
feels like you're getting there.
yeah. So we'll see. But yeah, it's continuing to do its thing. So yeah, I will stream that momentarily, but you will hear this later, so you will not be
catch the VOD.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna go ahead and confess I don't know when I'm gonna get back to streaming. I will try to stream some Ratchet & Clank because I do genuinely enjoy that game, and I look forward to playing it again. But I have just been swamped and have been trying to take my evening time to myself to do those other things I like to do, like reading, so I can present new Brett's book recommendations to you, because I know you're all waiting for them every series. So anyway, our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Evers, and our logo is by Mark Garcia. Have fun practicing your opera this week, and good night.
Good night.